The sound of shattering glass cut through the jazz music like a gunshot. Red wine dripped from the hem of a $10,000 white dress, pooling onto the marble floor. Beatrice, the wife of the most powerful CEO in the city, pointed a manicured finger at the trembling waitress and screamed those 4 words that would haunt the room forever. "You don't belong here!" Beatrice thought she had won. She thought she had crushed a nobody. But she didn't know that the man standing in the shadows, the man everyone feared, was watching every single move. And she certainly didn't know that the waitress she'd just humiliated held a secret that was about to destroy Beatrice's entire life. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it brought the entire empire crashing down. Sarah adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform, wincing as the cheap fabric rubbed against her neck. The backstage area of the Grandview Hotel was chaotic, a hive of shouting chefs, clattering silverware, and nervous event planners speaking into headsets. Tonight was the Obsidian Gala, the most exclusive corporate event in New York City. The guest list didn't just feature millionaires, it featured the people who signed the paychecks of millionaires. Sarah checked her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. Dark circles hung heavy under her hazel eyes, betraying the fact that she hadn't slept in 24 hours. Between her morning shift at the diner and taking care of her sick mother, sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. But she needed this shift. The agency paid triple for gala events, and triple pay meant rent would be covered for another month. "Sarah, stop looking at yourself and grab the champagne tray. Table 4 is dry." The floor manager, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, barked at her. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. Going now," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion trembling in her legs. She lifted the heavy silver tray, balancing 10 crystal flutes of Dom Pérignon, and pushed through the heavy velvet curtains into the ballroom. The transition was jarring. The kitchen smelled of grease and dish soap. The ballroom smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and fresh orchids. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the hundreds of guests. Men in bespoke Italian suits laughed loudly, while women in gowns that cost more than Sarah's yearly salary sipped drinks with bored expressions. Sarah moved through the crowd like a ghost. That was the rule. Be invisible. Fill the glass, take the empty plate, disappear. She was part of the furniture, necessary but unnoticed. However, there was one person in the room who made sure everyone noticed her. Sitting at the center table, the king's table, was Beatrice Sterling. She was stunning in a terrifying way, wearing a white silk gown that clung to her figure, adorned with diamonds that flashed aggressively under the lights. Beatrice was the wife of Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Industries, and the host of tonight's gala. Rumors about Beatrice were whispered in every service corridor in the city. They said she fired maids for making eye contact. They said she once threw a scalding pot of coffee at an assistant because it wasn't organic. She was the queen of this castle, and she ruled with a smile that looked like a bared blade. Sarah approached table 4, adjacent to the king's table. She carefully placed a fresh glass of champagne near an elderly gentleman who nodded kindly. As she turned to leave, her path was blocked. Beatrice had stood up. She wasn't looking at Sarah. She was looking past her, waving frantically at a photographer to capture her good side. Beatrice took a step back without looking, her high heel coming down hard on Sarah's foot. Sarah gasped, the sudden pain shooting up her leg. Instinctively, she jerked back to avoid being trampled. The tray in her hand tilted. It was a matter of physics and bad luck. One empty flute slid across the silver surface. Sarah lunged to catch it, her reflexes sharp, and she managed to grab the stem before it hit the floor. She saved the glass. She didn't drop a single drop of liquid, but the sudden movement caused her elbow to brush against Beatrice's arm. Beatrice spun around as if she had been stabbed. She looked at her arm, where absolutely nothing had happened, and then looked at Sarah with wide, theatrical horror. "Did you just touch me?" Beatrice announced, her voice pitched loud enough to cut through the conversation at the nearby tables. Sarah froze, clutching the tray against her chest. I'm so sorry, Mom. You stepped back, and I just tried to—" "Excuses?" Beatrice laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. She turned to the table of executives watching her. "Can you believe this? I pay a fortune for this venue, and the help is assaulting the guests." "I didn't mean to, I promise," Sarah pleaded, lowering her head. "I was just trying to save the glass." "Oh, the glass!" Beatrice sneered, stepping closer, invading Sarah's personal space. The scent of heavy rose perfume was suffocating. "You care more about a $5 piece of glass than the comfort of the people paying your wages. That tells me everything I need to know about your class." Sarah bit the inside of her cheek. "Don't cry. Don't speak. Just take it." "Go away." Beatrice dismissed her with a flick of her hand, like shooing a fly. "You're ruining the aesthetic." Sarah nodded quickly and retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. An hour later, the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted. The alcohol was flowing freely, and the volume of the chatter had risen. Mr. Henderson caught Sarah near the ice machine. "Table 1 needs a refill on the red wine, specifically the Chateau Margaux. And Sarah?" He looked at her sternly. "Be careful. Mrs. Sterling is in a mood tonight. Don't go near her if you don't have to." "I won't," Sarah promised. She fetched the decanter of vintage red wine. It was heavy, dark and rich, a liquid worth thousands. As she walked back onto the floor, she scanned the room for Beatrice, mapping out a path that would keep her at least 20 feet away at all times. Beatrice was currently standing near the orchestra pit, holding court with a group of young socialites who hung on her every word. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. Table 1 was in the opposite direction. Sarah moved efficiently, pouring wine for the board members at Table 1. As she finished and turned to head back to the service station, a sudden commotion erupted near the stage. The microphone squealed with feedback. Robert Sterling, the CEO, had taken the stage to give his speech. He was a handsome man, though he had a weak chin and eyes that constantly darted around the room as if looking for approval. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert boomed, "tonight is about excellence. It is about perfection." While all eyes turned to the stage, Sarah tried to slip into the shadows. But to get to the kitchen, she had to pass a narrow corridor formed by the heavy velvet drapes and a high-top cocktail table. As Sarah passed the cocktail table, a figure stepped out from the drapes. It was Beatrice. She shouldn't have been there. She was supposed to be near the stage with her husband. But there she was, waiting. Her eyes locked onto Sarah's, glittering with malice. Beatrice had clearly been stewing over the earlier interaction, her ego bruised by the mere existence of a servant who dared to breathe her air. Sarah stopped. "Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling. I'll just wait until you pass." "No," Beatrice said softly, smiling. "You're in my way." "I can back up," Sarah said, taking a step back. "You're clumsy, aren't you?" Beatrice observed, taking a step forward. In her hand, she held a half-full glass of white wine. "I try not to be, Ma'am. Let's see." It happened in slow motion. As Robert Sterling spoke about integrity and honor on the stage, his wife, Beatrice, deliberately stuck her foot out as Sarah tried to sidestep her. Sarah's boot caught on the silk of Beatrice's shoe. Sarah pitched forward, She tried to twist her body to protect the expensive decanter, to take the fall on her shoulder, but gravity was unforgiving. The heavy crystal decanter flew from her hand. It didn't hit the floor. It hit Beatrice. The decanter struck Beatrice's shoulder, bounced off, and shattered on the marble. A tidal wave of dark, blood-red wine exploded outward, drenching the front of Beatrice's pristine white silk gown. The crash echoed through the silent room. Robert stopped speaking mid-sentence. The orchestra stopped playing. 300 heads turned in unison. For a heartbeat, there was total silence. Beatrice stood there, looking down at her ruined dress, the red stain spreading across her chest like a fatal wound. She looked up, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Sarah was on her knees, surrounded by broken glass, her hands bleeding from small cuts. She looked up, terror seizing her throat. "You," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling with fury. Then she screamed, "You idiot! Look what you did!" Beatrice lunged at Sarah. The crowd gasped. Beatrice grabbed a handful of napkins from the nearby table and threw them at Sarah's face. "My dress! This is custom Versace. It's worth more than your entire life!" Beatrice shrieked. The elegant facade was gone. She was a banshee now. Mr. Henderson came running from the kitchen, pale as a sheet. "Mrs. Sterling, I am so sorry. We will handle this. Sarah, get up." Sarah tried to stand, but her knee was throbbing. She tripped me. I didn't." "Liar!" Beatrice shouted, pointing that manicured finger again. "Everyone saw you. You were stumbling around all night, drunk probably. You attacked me." Robert Sterling had rushed down from the stage. He put a hand on his wife's arm. "Beatrice, calm down. People are watching." "I don't care who is watching." Beatrice shoved her husband away. She looked down at Sarah with disgusted superiority. "Look at you. Pathetic. Filthy. Ruining everything you touch." She took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the final blow to Sarah's dignity. The room was deathly quiet. "You don't belong here." Beatrice spat the words out, ensuring every person in the back of the room could hear. "You are trash. You are a servant. You exist to serve people like me, and you can't even do that right. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested." Sarah felt the tears burning her eyes. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She began to scramble backward, cutting her palm on a shard of glass, leaving a smear of real blood next to the puddle of wine. "I said, get out!" Beatrice raised her hand as if to strike the girl. "That's enough." The voice was low, baritone, and calm, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room turn heavy. It wasn't Robert. It wasn't Mr. Henderson. From the back of the room, near the main entrance, a man was walking forward. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with military precision. He didn't look like the other soft, wealthy men in the room. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow and eyes that looked like storm clouds. He walked with a cane, a sleek, black, ebony cane with a silver handle, but he didn't limp. He walked with a rhythm of absolute authority. The crowd parted for him instantly, like the Red Sea. Nobody knew who he was, but everyone knew instinctively that you did not stand in his way. Beatrice froze, her hand still raised in the air. She squinted at the man. "Who are you?" "This is a private event." "Security." The man ignored her. He ignored Robert. He ignored the whispering crowd. He walked straight through the puddle of wine, ruining his own polished Italian shoes without a second thought, and stopped directly in front of Sarah. The room went silent. He looked down at the trembling waitress. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She didn't recognize him. Slowly, The man lowered himself. He ignored the glass shards that pressed into the fabric of his expensive trousers. He knelt on one knee in the wine and the wreckage, bringing himself to Sarah's eye level. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. Gently, with a tenderness that shocked everyone watching, he took Sarah's bleeding hand. "You're hurt," he said softly. I'm fine, sir. Please, you'll get dirty," Sarah stammered, trying to pull her hand away. He held it firm. He wrapped her hand in the cloth. Then he looked up at Beatrice. The look on his face changed. When he looked at Sarah, it was gentle. When he looked at Beatrice, it was like opening the door to a furnace. "You said she doesn't belong here?" the man asked, his voice echoing off the walls. Beatrice faltered, sensing a shift in the power dynamic she couldn't quite understand. She's just a waitress. She ruined my gala." The man slowly stood up, helping Sarah to her feet. He kept his hand on her shoulder, a protective shield. "Your gala?" the man asked. He turned to look at Robert, the supposed CEO. "Robert, tell your wife whose gala this actually is." Robert Sterling, the man who had been acting like a king all night, suddenly looked like he was about to vomit. He was shaking. He looked at the man with the cane, then at the floor. It's his gala, Beatrice," Robert whispered, his voice cracking. "What?" Beatrice snapped. "Who is he?" Robert swallowed hard. "That is Alexander Thorne, the chairman of the board, the owner of Sterling Industries. He owns the hotel, he owns the company, he owns everything." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alexander Thorne, the ghost, the recluse billionaire who hadn't been seen in public for 5 years, the man who signed Robert's checks. Alexander didn't look at Robert. He kept his eyes on Beatrice. "You are correct about one thing, Mrs. Sterling," Alexander said, his voice cold as ice. "Someone in this room does not belong here. Someone in this room is trash." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "But it isn't her." The silence in the ballroom was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes an explosion. Beatrice Sterling blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The arrogance that had coated her features just seconds ago began to crack, replaced by a dawning, terrifying realization. She looked at her husband, Robert, hoping he would laugh, tell her it was a joke, tell her that this man with the cane was just an actor. But Robert was pale, sweat beading on his forehead under the harsh chandelier lights. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Alexander," Robert stammered, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. We didn't expect you. You haven't attended a gala in 5 years. We were just handling a personnel issue." "A personnel issue," Alexander repeated. His voice was devoid of warmth. He didn't look at Robert. He was looking at Sarah's hand, which was still wrapped in his handkerchief. The white cloth was turning a deep crimson. "Is that what we call physical assault these days, Robert?" "I didn't assault her," Beatrice shrieked. Despite the fear, her ego wouldn't let her stay quiet. "She tripped. She threw wine on me. Look at my dress, whoever you are." Alexander slowly turned his head to look at Beatrice. The movement was predatory. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Sterling," Alexander said quietly. "You are the woman who has spent the last 3 years treating the staff of my hotels like your personal punching bags. I have the reports, the fired maids, the chefs you verbally abused, the doorman you tried to have deported because he didn't open the door fast enough." Beatrice's face went white. You spy on me." "I protect my assets," Alexander replied, "and my employees are my most valuable assets, far more valuable than a CEO who lets his wife run rampant." He turned to Mr. Henderson, the floor manager, who was cowering near the kitchen doors. "Mr. Henderson?" Alexander said. "You." "Yes, Mr. Chairman?" Henderson squeaked. "Did Sarah trip?" The room held its breath. Mr. Henderson looked at Beatrice, who was glaring at him with a threat in her eyes. Then he looked at Alexander, the man who owned the building. "No, sir," Mr. Henderson said, his voice shaking but clear. Mrs. Sterling stuck her foot out. It was deliberate. Beatrice gasped. "You liar! You're fired! You're all fired!" "Quiet!" Alexander snapped. The single word cracked like a whip. He took a step closer to Beatrice. He towered over her. "You said she doesn't belong here. You said she is trash." He gestured around the opulent ballroom. "This room is filled with people who were born into money, people who have never worked a day of hard labor in their lives. Sarah has worked 2 jobs for 3 years to support a sick parent. She stands on her feet for 12 hours a day while you sit on furniture that costs more than her house." Alexander leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that only Beatrice, Robert, and Sarah could hear. "Character determines who belongs at my table, Beatrice, not net worth. And you have no character." He straightened up and addressed the room. "Robert, take your wife and leave." Robert blinked. "Alexander, please. The keynote speech. The investors." "There will be no speech from you tonight," Alexander said coldly. "In fact, looking at the quarterly reports on my desk, and looking at the liability you've brought to this company tonight, I think it's time we reassessed your position entirely. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending an investigation into your conduct." "Suspended?" Robert choked out. "You can't do that here, in front of everyone." "I just did," Alexander said. "Now get her out of my sight before I have security escort you out like common trespassers." The humiliation was absolute. Beatrice looked around the room. Her friends, the socialites who had laughed with her minutes ago, were now looking away, pretending to check their phones or inspect their nails. No one came to her defense. Power had shifted, and the rats were scurrying. Robert grabbed Beatrice's arm, hard. "We're leaving." "But my dress!" Beatrice wailed as he dragged her toward the exit. "Shut up about the dress, Beatrice. We just lost everything," Robert hissed. As they exited the ballroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind them, the tension in the room broke. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Alexander didn't care. He turned his back on the entire room of billionaires. His focus was entirely on Sarah. She was trembling, shock setting in. She tried to pull her hand away again. "Sir, Mr. Thorne, you didn't have to. I'm just—" "Sarah," he said, his voice softening instantly. "Breath." "I'm going to lose my job," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Mr. Henderson will fire me once you leave. I need this money. My mum's medication is due on Tuesday." Alexander shook his head. "You aren't going to lose your job. But you are done for the night." He gestured to a large man in a black suit standing by the wall, his personal security. "Prepare the car," Alexander ordered. "Sir?" Sarah panicked. "Where are we going? I can't go with you. I have to clean this mess up." Alexander reached out and gently took the empty tray from under her arm, setting it on a nearby table. "You're not cleaning anything," Alexander stated. "You are bleeding, and we have matters to discuss." "What matters?" Sarah asked, confused. Alexander looked at her, and for a second, a flicker of something unreadable passed through his dark eyes. "Do you remember the diner on 4th Street, the one near the hospital?" Sarah frowned. "Yes, I work the morning shift there." "Why?" "6 months ago," Alexander said, "a man came in. He was wearing dirty clothes. He had no wallet. He sat in the corner booth for 2 hours just to get out of the rain. The manager wanted to kick him out. Sarah's eyes widened. She remembered. A tall man, bearded then, looking defeated. She had stopped the manager. She had paid for the man's coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich out of her own tips. She had told him, "Everyone has bad days. Sit as long as you like." She looked at Alexander's face, the sharp jawline, the intense eyes. Without the beard and in a 3-piece suit, he looked like a different species. But the eyes, they were the same. "That was you," she whispered. "That was the day I buried my father," Alexander said simply. "And the day I found out my brother had betrayed the company. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to see if there was any kindness left in this city when I had nothing to offer in return." He offered her his arm, ignoring the blood on her uniform, ignoring the stares of the elite crowd. "You were the only one who didn't look through me, Sarah. Now, let me return the favor." The ride in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was smoother than any bed Sarah had ever slept in. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, streaks of gold and neon in the rainy night. Sarah sat on the edge of the leather seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was acutely aware of the wine stain on her apron and the smell of stale alcohol clinging to her. Sitting across from her, Alexander Thorne typed on a tablet, his cane resting against his knee. He hadn't spoken since they got in the car. He had merely instructed the driver to go to the Spire. The Spire was the tallest residential building in the city. It was a needle of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. Sarah had only ever seen it from the bus window. "Does it hurt?" Alexander asked, not looking up from his screen. Sarah jumped slightly. "The hand. It's okay, just a scratch." "It's a deep laceration," he corrected. "We have a doctor waiting at the penthouse." "Penthouse?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Sir, I really think there's been a misunderstanding. I appreciate what you did back there. Really, you saved me. But I can't go to your penthouse. I need to go home. My mother." "Your mother is currently at St. Jude's Hospital, correct?" Alexander asked. Sarah froze. "How do you know that?" "I know a lot of things, Sarah." He finally set the tablet down and looked at her. "I know she has late-stage kidney failure. I know you are 3 months behind on the medical bills. I know you work 70 hours a week and sleep an average of 4. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't fear, exactly, but the unsettling feeling of being exposed. "Who are you? I mean, really? Why investigate a waitress?" "Because," Alexander said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "I don't believe in coincidences. That day in the diner you showed integrity. Tonight you showed resilience. Beatrice humiliated you, and you didn't lash out. You held your ground." The car slowed to a halt. They were inside a private underground garage that looked cleaner than most hospitals. "I am not investigating you to hurt you, Sarah," he said softly. "I am investigating you because I have a problem. A very expensive, very complicated problem. And I believe you are the only person in this city who can solve it." Sarah laughed nervously. "I serve coffee and champagne, Mr. Thorne. Unless your problem is a lack of caffeine, I don't see how I can help a billionaire." "Come upstairs," he said, the door opening automatically. "I'll explain everything, and if you don't like what you hear, my driver will take you home, and I will pay off your mother's hospital bills in full, just for your time." Sarah stared at him. He was offering to clear her debts just for a conversation. She would be a fool to say no. "Okay," she whispered. They took a private elevator that moved so fast Sarah's ears popped. When the doors opened, She stepped into a world she didn't know existed. The penthouse was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the skyline. The furniture was modern, dark, and masculine. A fireplace roared in the center of the room. A middle-aged woman in a white coat was waiting. "Mr. Thorne?" "Dr. Evans," Alexander nodded. "Please attend to Miss Miller's hand immediately." While the doctor cleaned and stitched Sarah's hand, it took 4 stitches. Sarah watched Alexander. He poured himself a drink, wincing slightly as he put weight on his cane. He looked tired. Beneath the power and the suit, he looked exhausted. Once the doctor left, silence returned to the room. Alexander walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. "My grandfather built this company on reputation," Alexander began, his back to her. "Sterling Industries isn't just hotels, it's shipping, technology, real estate. When my father died 6 months ago, the board of directors panicked. They don't trust me. They think I'm too unstable." He tapped his cane on the floor. "Because of the accident that gave me this," he gestured to his leg, "and because I refuse to play their social games. I hate the galas. I hate the politics." He turned to face her. "There is a clause in my grandfather's trust. A very old-fashioned, archaic clause. To fully inherit the controlling stake of the company and prevent the board from selling it off to foreign investors, the chairman must be settled, married, stable." Sarah saw where this was going, and her heart began to hammer against her ribs. "Mr. Thorne." "They gave me a deadline," Alexander continued, ignoring her interruption. "The deadline is in 3 days. If I am not engaged to be married by the annual shareholders meeting on Friday, I lose control. The company will be broken up. Thousands of people, including Mr. Henderson, including the staff at the hotel tonight, will lose their jobs." He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. "I cannot marry a woman like Beatrice. I cannot marry a socialite who wants me for my money or my title. They are sharks. If I marry one of them, they will eat me alive within a year." He looked deep into Sarah's eyes. "I need someone who understands what it means to work. Someone who knows the value of $1. Someone who has loyalty. I need someone who can stand in a room full of vultures and not be intimidated." Sarah stood up, her stitched hand throbbing. "You want me to pretend?" "I want you to be my wife," Alexander said. "On paper. For 1 year. We will sign a contract. You will play the role of the woman who captured the heart of the reclusive billionaire. You will attend the events. You will live here." "And in return?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "In return," Alexander said, "I will move your mother to the best private clinic in Switzerland. She will get the kidney transplant she needs within the month. I will buy you a house anywhere you want, and you will receive $10 million when the divorce is finalized." Sarah felt the room spin. It was madness, it was a fairy tale, and a nightmare wrapped into one. $10 million. Her mother's life saved. "Why me?" she asked again. "There must be other women." "There are," Alexander admitted, "but none of them saved me when I was a nobody in a diner. None of them looked at a bum and saw a human being." He held out his hand, the same hand that had pulled her from the floor of the ballroom. "So, Sarah, do we have a deal? Or do you want to go back to pouring wine for people like Beatrice?" Sarah looked at his hand. She thought of her mother, lying in a crowded hospital ward, fading away day by day. She thought of Beatrice's shoe crushing her foot. She thought of the years of invisibility. She took a deep breath. "I have one condition," Sarah said. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "Beatrice," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "If I'm going to be your wife, if I'm going to be the queen of this company, I want her to know it. I want her to know exactly who she stepped on." Alexander's lips curled into a small, dangerous smile. It was the first time she had seen him smile for real. "Oh, she will," Alexander promised. "Believe me, Sarah. By the time we are done, Beatrice Sterling will wish she had never learned your name." He squeezed her hand. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Thorne." Dawn broke over New York City, painting the skyline in hues of violet and gold, but inside the penthouse of the spire, the day had already begun. Sarah stood in front of a mirror that was taller than she was. She barely recognized the reflection staring back. The tired waitress with grease in her hair and bags under her eyes was gone. In her place stood a woman whose skin glowed from a 3-hour spa treatment, whose hair cascaded in glossy chestnut waves, and who wore a silk robe that felt like water against her skin. "Chin up, darling. You're slouching," a sharp voice commanded. Sarah straightened her spine instantly. The voice belonged to Paolo, a stylist Alexander had flown in from Milan overnight. Paolo and his team of 4 assistants had been working on Sarah since 5 a.m. They had manicured, polished, and tailored her into perfection. "I feel like a doll," Sarah murmured, looking at her hands. Her nails were painted a soft, expensive nude color. The stitches from the wine glass incident were neatly covered by a sheer, skin-colored glove that looked like a fashion statement rather than a bandage. "You are not a doll," Alexander's voice came from the doorway. "You are a weapon." Sarah turned. Alexander was leaning against the doorframe, dressed in a navy suit, his cane in hand. He looked rested, but his eyes were still vigilant. He walked into the room, waving a hand to dismiss the stylists. Paolo bowed and ushered his team out, leaving the 2 of them alone in the dressing room, surrounded by racks of designer gowns. "My mother?" Sarah asked immediately. "She is currently on a private medical jet en route to Zurich," Alexander confirmed. "My team sent me a photo of her comfortable and stable. She believes you have been hired as a high-level personal assistant for an overseas assignment. We will stick to that story for now to keep her from worrying." Sarah let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You repay me by surviving tonight," Alexander said, his expression serious. "Tonight is the shareholders' meeting. It is not a party. It is an execution ground. Robert and Beatrice will be there. The entire board will be there. They expect me to walk in alone, admit defeat, and hand over the company." He reached out and selected a dress from the rack. It wasn't white and it wasn't pink. It was a deep, midnight blue velvet, sleek and architectural. It looked regal. It looked powerful. "Wear this," he said. "Beatrice wears white to look innocent. You will wear the color of royalty." 2 hours later, Sarah was ready. The dress fit her like a second skin, accentuating curves she usually hid under her loose uniform. She wore sapphire earrings that Alexander said belonged to his grandmother. When she walked into the living room, Alexander stopped pouring his scotch. He stared at her for a long moment, the glass hovering in mid-air. "Do I look okay?" Sarah asked, her nerves returning. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume." "You look formidable," Alexander said quietly. He walked over to her. "But the dress is just fabric. The jewelry is just stone. What makes you dangerous, Sarah, is that you have nothing to lose. Beatrice fights for her reputation. Robert fights for his greed. You fought for survival. That makes you stronger than them." He held out his arm. "Are you ready to go take back my company?" Sarah thought of Beatrice's sneer. "You don't belong here." She thought of the way Mr. Henderson had looked at the floor. She thought of every rich patron who had snapped their fingers at her. She took Alexander's arm, her grip firm. "Let's go," she said. The Sterling Industries headquarters was a fortress of glass in the financial district. The top-floor boardroom was legendary, a cavernous space with a mahogany table that seated 50 people. Tonight, the room was full. Robert Sterling sat at the head of the table, though it wasn't his seat. He looked smug. Beside him sat Beatrice, wearing another white dress, looking like the grieving victim. She was recounting the story of the attack to a sympathetic board member. "It was terrifying," Beatrice lied, dabbing at dry eyes. That waitress was deranged, and for Alexander to side with her, it just shows he's not mentally fit to lead. It's sad, really. "We'll handle it, darling," Robert soothed her, checking his watch. 5 more minutes. If he doesn't present a fiancé by 8 hours p.m., the clause activates. The chairmanship passes to me. A heavy-set man with a cigar, Mr. Galloway, the oldest board member, grunted. "Just make sure the papers are ready, Robert. We need to stabilize the stock before the market opens tomorrow." "Everything is ready," Robert smiled. "Alexander is a recluse. He hasn't dated in years. There is no way he found a wife in 3 days. We've won." The clock on the wall ticked. 7:58 p.m. 7:59 p.m. Robert stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Well, gentlemen, it appears Alexander has decided not to show. I suppose we should proceed with the vote to—" Boom! The heavy double doors of the boardroom didn't just open, they were thrown wide. Alexander Thorne strode in. The sound of his cane hitting the hardwood floor echoed like a gavel strike. Click, click, click. The room went dead silent. Robert sank back into his chair. "You're late," Robert stammered, his confidence faltering. "I am precisely on time," Alexander replied, checking his vintage Patek Philippe watch. "It is 8:08 p.m. on the dot." He stopped at the foot of the table, looking at the 50 faces staring back at him. Most looked hostile. Some looked curious. "You are all here to enforce the heritage clause," Alexander announced, his voice filling the room without shouting. "You believe that because I am unmarried, I lack the stability to lead this family empire. It's in the bylaws, Alexander," Mr. Galloway said gruffly. "Nothing personal. Business is business." "Agreed," Alexander nodded. "Business is business." He turned slightly toward the open doors. "Please welcome my fiancée, the future Mrs. Thorne." Beatrice let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, please, who did you hire? An escort? An actress?" Sarah walked in. She didn't walk like a waitress. She walked with the slow, deliberate grace Alexander had coached her on in the car. The midnight blue velvet dress caught the light, making her look like a dark queen. Her head was high, her expression cool and unreadable. She walked to Alexander's side and placed her hand on his arm. For a moment, nobody moved. The board members squinted. Who was this stunning woman? She looked familiar, but the context was so different they couldn't place her. But Beatrice knew. Beatrice's eyes went wide. Her jaw actually dropped. She stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward with a loud crash. "You!" Beatrice screamed, pointing a shaking finger. "That's the maid! That's the waitress! That's the trash from the gala!" Chaos erupted. The board members began shouting over each other. "A waitress? Is this a joke, Alexander? This is a mockery of the proceedings." Alexander raised his cane and slammed it down on the table. The sound was like a gunshot. "Silence!" he roared. The room quieted down instantly. Alexander's eyes were blazing. "This woman," Alexander said, placing a hand on Sarah's lower back, "is Sarah Miller. And yes, she worked as a waitress. She worked to support her dying mother while maintaining a dignity that none of you possess." He looked directly at Robert. "She is not trash, Beatrice. She is the woman who saved me when I was at my lowest. She is the only person I trust with my life. And as of this afternoon—" Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a document. He slid it down the long table. "She is my wife." Robert grabbed the paper. His hand shook as he read it. It was a marriage certificate, signed, stamped, and legally binding, dated 3 hours ago. This is fraud," Robert sputtered. "You married her today, just to keep the company." "I married her because she is the partner I chose," Alexander said smoothly. "The clause states I must be married. It does not specify for how long. The law is satisfied. I remain chairman." "No!" Beatrice shrieked. She ran around the table, ignoring her husband's attempts to stop her. She marched right up to Sarah. Beatrice was seething. Up close, Sarah could see the veins popping in Beatrice's forehead. The woman was unraveling. "You think you can play dress-up?" Beatrice hissed, spittle flying. "You are a nobody. You serve food. You clean floors. You don't belong in this room, and you certainly don't belong with him." Sarah looked at Beatrice. She remembered the fear she felt yesterday. She remembered the humiliation. But then she felt the heavy velvet of her dress, the weight of the sapphire earrings, and the solid presence of Alexander beside her. Sarah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Actually, Beatrice," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear, ringing through the boardroom, "I own half of this room now. So technically, you are standing in my light." Beatrice gasped. Sarah took a step forward, forcing Beatrice to step back. "And about the wine," Sarah continued. "You were right. I am clumsy sometimes." Sarah reached out to the water pitcher on the conference table. With a casual flick of her wrist, she poured the entire pitcher of ice water onto Beatrice's shoes, the same expensive shoes Beatrice had used to trip her. "Oops," Sarah deadpanned. The board members gasped. Alexander let out a short, sharp laugh. Beatrice looked down at her ruined shoes, then up at Sarah with pure hatred. "You will regret this," Beatrice whispered. "You have no idea what you've walked into. You think this is a game? You think Alexander is the hero?" Beatrice looked at Alexander, her eyes gleaming with a new, dark secret. "Does she know Alexander?" Beatrice asked, her voice dropping to a venomous purr. "Does your little waitress know how your father really died? Does she know who was driving the car that night?" Alexander went rigid. His hand tightened on his cane until his knuckles turned white. The color drained from his face. Sarah looked up at Alexander, confused. "What is she talking about?" Beatrice smiled, sensing blood. She turned to Sarah. "Ask him," Beatrice taunted. "Ask your noble husband why the brakes on his father's car failed. Ask him why he's the only one who survived the crash that killed the former CEO." The room was deathly quiet. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. "That's enough!" Mr. Galloway shouted. "Security! Escort Mr. and Mrs. Sterling out! The meeting is adjourned!" Security guards rushed in, grabbing a screaming Beatrice and a defeated Robert. But the damage was done. As they were dragged out, Beatrice shouted one last thing over her shoulder. "He didn't marry you to save the company, you stupid girl. He married you because he needs a witness to cover his tracks. He's a murderer." The doors slammed shut. Sarah stood frozen. She looked at Alexander. She expected him to deny it. She expected him to be angry. But Alexander didn't look at her. He was staring at the closed doors, his eyes haunted, his breathing shallow. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Alexander," Sarah whispered, pulling away from him slightly. "Is it true?" Alexander slowly turned to look at her. His eyes were cold again, the wall slammed back up. "We are going home, Sarah. Do not ask questions you don't want the answers to." He turned and walked out the side door, leaving her standing alone at the head of the boardroom table. The victory had lasted exactly 5 minutes. Now, the nightmare was just beginning. The ride back to the penthouse was suffocating. The rain had turned into a storm, battering the windows of the Rolls-Royce, matching the turmoil inside. Alexander sat staring out the window, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. Sarah sat on the opposite side, her hands folded in her lap, the sapphire ring on her finger feeling heavier by the second. When the elevator doors opened into the penthouse, Alexander immediately walked toward his study. "Alexander, wait," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped him. He paused, his hand on the doorframe, back turned to her. "I am tired, Sarah. It has been a long night. The guest room is prepared for you." "I'm not going to the guest room," Sarah said, stepping out of her high heels and walking barefoot across the cold marble floor toward him. "And I'm not going to sleep next to a man who might be a murderer." Alexander spun around. "I did not kill him." "Then tell me," Sarah yelled, her frustration boiling over. "Beatrice said you were the driver. She said you survived when he didn't. Why did she say that?" Alexander looked at her, his eyes wild and tormented. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a wounded animal. He limped over to the fireplace and grabbed a heavy crystal tumbler, pouring a drink but not drinking it. He just gripped the glass until his knuckles turned white. "I was driving," Alexander admitted, his voice raspy. "It was raining, just like tonight. My father and I were arguing. He wanted to sell a division of the company. I told him it would put thousands out of work. I was angry. I was driving too fast." He took a shaky breath. "We came to a curve on the cliffs. I hit the brakes. The pedal went to the floor. Nothing happened." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. "We went through the guardrail," Alexander whispered. "The car flipped 3 times down the embankment. I remember the sound of metal screaming. I remember him calling my name." He looked down at his cane. "My leg was crushed under the dashboard. I couldn't get to him. The car caught fire. I had to watch my father burn while I was trapped 2 feet away." Tears streamed down Alexander's face, the first time Sarah had seen him show such raw vulnerability. "I didn't kill him, Sarah, but I failed to save him. Every day I wake up, I wish it had been me." Sarah felt her heart break for him. She crossed the distance between them and gently placed a hand on his arm. The tension in his muscles was like stone. "But the brakes?" Sarah asked softly. "Why did they fail? Was it just an accident?" Alexander looked up, and the sadness in his eyes was replaced by a cold, hard rage. "That's what the police thought. An accident. A young, reckless driver. But I hired private investigators, the best in the world. They recovered the black box and the brake lines from the wreckage." He walked to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a thick red file. He threw it onto the coffee table. Photos spilled out. Shredded metal, bank statements, phone records. "The lines were cut," Alexander said. "Precision cuts. Sabotage." Sarah picked up a bank statement. It showed a transfer of $200,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, 2 days before the crash. The sender was obscured, but the routing number was highlighted. "Who did it?" Sarah asked, though she already felt the answer in her gut. "The routing number traces back to a shell company owned by a holding firm," Alexander said. "And that firm is registered to Robert Sterling." Sarah gasped. "Robert, your cousin? He killed his own uncle?" "He was in debt," Alexander explained. "Gambling debts, massive ones. He needed access to the company accounts to cover his losses, but my father had cut him off. With my father dead, and me either dead or in prison for vehicular manslaughter, Robert would have become the sole heir to the empire. But you survived, Sarah realized. I survived, Alexander nodded, and I spent 6 months in rehab learning to walk again, planning my revenge. I couldn't go to the police immediately. Robert had paid off the local precinct captain. If I had made a move without absolute proof and full control of the company, he would have buried the evidence and had me committed to a psych ward. He looked at Sarah intensely. That's why I needed the marriage. That's why I needed tonight. By triggering the grandfather clause, I secured absolute legal control of Sterling Industries. Robert can't touch the assets now, and tomorrow morning, the FBI, not the local police, will receive this file. Sarah looked at the papers, then at the man standing before her. He wasn't a villain. He was a son grieving his father, fighting a war alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked. "Because knowing the truth put a target on your back," Alexander said. "Beatrice knows Robert is guilty. That's why she was so terrified tonight. She knows their time is up." Suddenly, Alexander's phone buzzed. He picked it up, read the text, and let out a long sigh. "It's done," he said. "What?" "My security team intercepted Robert and Beatrice at the private airfield. They were trying to flee the country." Alexander showed her the screen. It was a live feed of Robert and Beatrice being handcuffed by federal agents on the tarmac. Beatrice was kicking and screaming. Robert looked defeated. "It's over," Alexander whispered. He slumped onto the sofa, the weight of 6 months of vengeance finally lifting off his shoulders. Sarah sat down next to him. The penthouse was quiet again, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. "So," Sarah said after a while, "you have the company. You have your revenge. Robert is going to prison." "Yes," Alexander said. He looked at her. "And I fulfilled my end of the bargain. Your mother arrived in Zurich an hour ago. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The doctors are optimistic." "Thank you," Sarah said, tears pricking her eyes again. "And the money?" Alexander continued. $10 million will be transferred to your account tomorrow. You can annul the marriage. You can leave. You never have to see me or this world again." He looked away, staring into the fire. "You can go back to being free." Sarah looked at his profile. She saw the loneliness there. She saw the man who had sat in a diner with dirty clothes just to feel human connection. She saw the man who had knelt in wine and glass to save her dignity. She thought about the $10 million. She thought about her old life. Then she reached out and took his hand. Alexander looked at her, surprised. "I signed a contract for 1 year, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said softly, a small smile playing on her lips. "I don't break my promises. Besides," she squeezed his hand, "I think I'm starting to like the view from here." Alexander stared at her. For the first time, the storm in his eyes cleared completely. He turned his hand over and interlaced his fingers with hers. "It will be a difficult year," he warned her. "The press, the trials, the scandal." "I've handled double shifts at a diner during the Sunday rush," Sarah laughed. "I think I can handle a little scandal." Alexander smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. It wasn't a kiss for the cameras. It was a promise. "You belong here, Sarah," he whispered. "You are the only one who ever truly belonged." Outside, the storm broke, and the first light of a clear, bright morning began to shine over the city. In the end, Beatrice was right about one thing. The room did go silent. But it wasn't the silence of Sarah's shame. It was the silence of Beatrice's defeat. Robert and Beatrice are currently serving 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy and murder. Sarah's mother made a full recovery, and as for Sarah and Alexander, well, they decided not to annul the marriage after a year. In fact, they just celebrated their 3rd anniversary. This story reminds us that true class has nothing to do with the price of your dress or the balance in your bank account. True class is how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Beatrice thought she could crush a waitress, but she forgot that even the smallest stone can topple a giant if thrown with enough force. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have taken the $10 million and left? Or would you have stayed with Alexander? Let me know your choice in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.